This morning we're continuing our short sermon series we're going through when we're all together on All Together Sundays, looking at faith and vision. We're a church going through lots of changes at the minute. It feels like the shape of the church keeps on changing as we grow and as we take next steps. And whilst that's really awesome, it's also challenging because change is difficult sometimes. Just when you get used to one thing, suddenly it can be on to the next thing. And so we're just looking at different Bible characters whose lives demonstrate what it means to live in faithful obedience to God's call and vision, even when it's difficult, even when change is difficult, even when challenges are difficult, what it means to be living in faithful response to Him. And so this morning we're going to be in the book of Nehemiah, chapters 1 and 2, just looking at some of the story of Nehemiah. Now I enjoy... Hang on, it's my mistake, I hadn't turned it on. It's fine. I enjoy watching TV programs of things like where cars are wrecked. You find a car that's in a barn somewhere or hidden somewhere and no one's seen it for years and it's completely ruined. And you look and you think, that car will never be a car again. That car will never run again. And then they go through the whole process. And at the end, what they end up with is this amazing car that has been rebuilt from something that was ruined. Or maybe you watch a program like The Repair Shop, which I never quite got into, but people come with their, different things from their past that have been destroyed or damaged, but like family heirlooms often that are really important, and they just look terrible, and they hand it over and tell the story, and by the end of the program, they've all been restored, and they look like new. Or maybe, you look at a building program and you find a destroyed house and someone turns it into something amazing at the end of the program. Like those sort of things. I enjoy those sort of programs. I enjoy those sort of videos. There are many things that seem broken beyond repair. And actually not just physical things. It might be relationships. It might be dreams that we once had that seem broken and gone. Sometimes you find churches seem to be broken beyond repair. People have fallen out, and a church that once was mighty and really doing something amazing in the community, you think, what happened to that? Sometimes you look at communities that were thriving, that suddenly seem broken and destroyed. Maybe you might, on a bigger scale, look at society and think, what's happened to our society? It seems to be falling apart. Maybe families that are once close that now seem broken. People don't talk to each other. There were all sorts of different things. Something that once stood strong but now lies in ruins. And actually, this is what today's story is all about as we look at the story of Nehemiah. It's a story of a God who takes things that are broken and destroyed and renews them and builds them again in different ways. And so this morning we're going to walk through the first couple of chapters of Nehemiah's story and see how faith can rebuild what others have given up on. And it often feels like, doesn't it? We look at things that are broken, and maybe they've been that way a long time, and we feel like it's always going to be like this. Life's always going to be like this. That is always going to be that way. It feels like it's been so long since it was something else that I don't have any expectation it'll ever change. This morning's story shows us something different. So if you've got a Bible, we're going to be in Nehemiah 1 to start with. And just to give you a context of what we're about to read, in the Old Testament, you read the story of the nation of Israel, how God begins that nation. It's God's special nation, set apart for Him, one that He loved and cared for. You see the story of how He establishes it in amongst all the other nations, and that their place is there for Him, and that they're to live for Him and obey Him, and He would bless them. And then throughout the Old Testament, we see a continuing story of how this nation, little by little, and then more and more, begins to turn their back on God. And they worship other gods, and they do other things. And this nation that was set apart for Him begins to turn their back on Him. And it becomes ruined and distorted. And then there's a bit of back and forth, and God warns them, and they kind of get back in line, and then they don't. And then eventually they just drift off, refuse to be obedient to Him. And so God gives that nation over to their enemies. Little by little, a bit at a time, different nations around come and they have battles, and Israel loses, and a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and eventually the whole nation is defeated. And then what happens is the people in the nation of Israel, they're taken away to exile in a different part of an empire. So it's not just that they're defeated, it's that they're forcibly removed and taken to a different place. For generations and generations, the nation lives in exile. Generations later, so we're talking like the people who were removed, they died, we're talking generations and generations later, gradually people are allowed to return back to the land that was once theirs. And this is where we meet Nehemiah in this story. Nehemiah still lives in a foreign country. He hasn't gone home. It actually says that he works as the cupbearer for the king of the whole empire. And so he gets to serve the drinks to the king. That's basically his job. He hasn't returned home to his own nation. He has quite a good job in the royal court serving the king. It's probably not a bad place to work. Probably comes with a reasonably comfortable lifestyle. And one day Nehemiah meets his brother who has gone home to the nation of Israel and has come back to visit him. And he asks him how things are going. How things are going in Israel, how things are going in the city of Jerusalem. And that's where we pick up our reading today. Nehemiah, I'm behind on this already. Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. It says, "They said to me, things are not going well for those who've returned to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven." And we'll just pause our story there. Nehemiah hears the news of Jerusalem. He gets this report that the walls have been destroyed. It is a city without walls. It is a city without gates. We don't quite understand what that really means in our context. But there's a place I read about in America where they couldn't afford to pay for their police department overnight. And so the police department shut at like 6 p.m. and didn't open again until the next morning. And so between the time of 6 p.m. and like 8 a.m. in the morning, there was no law enforcement in the community. No one to enforce the law, no one for protection, no one who's going to come if something's being committed. It was a defenceless community. Well, that's what happens in this time when your walls are torn down. You're a defenceless community. You have no barriers. People can come and go as they please, come and do what they want. They're at the mercy of whoever. That's what's happened. That's what he hears. The city of God, the nation of God, is lying in disgrace, defenseless and broken. What was once a mighty city for a mighty nation is gone. Defenseless, broken. And it says that Nehemiah's heart is broken. He begins to weep and weep and weep for the state of his nation, for the state of the city. It says he fasts, he prays, he calls out to God to have mercy and to bless his nation once again. And this wasn't just Nehemiah being sad. Like, we can all get sad at things sometimes. If you show me the right picture of something and play some sad piano music behind it, I will get sad at that. That's not the same as having my heart broken, because once that's gone, I'll just move on. Having your heart broken is when you see something, you encounter something, and it just won't leave you alone. It just stays with you. You just can't, as much as you try to ignore it, you can't. It just eats away at your insides. Nehemiah wasn't just being sad. He had a holy burden. Something had come upon him. A divine discomfort. Nehemiah couldn't ignore the brokenness. And maybe we all have that in different ways. Like, what is it that breaks your heart? Not just makes you sad in the right moment at the right time, but breaks your heart. What situation, what person, what injustice makes you stop and say, this isn't right? Something that you feel like, I should do something about this. What can I do? Faith in this story begins with a burden. And I want to say, different people have different burdens. So the danger is, if you get burdened by something with God, you feel that everybody should have the same burden that you have. And that isn't true, because God breaks different people's hearts in different ways for different things. And there'll be people who are burdened with the same thing you're burdened with, but there'll be other people who just don't get what you're burdened with. It's not their burden. God's given them something else to carry that they're passionate about. And so you should have, if you're stirred with something for God, don't have an expectation that everybody's going to be stirred with that. Some others will be, but other people are carrying other things that they've got to push into and go with. We see here that Nehemiah's heart is broken, and actually it drives into prayer. So if we continue our story, verses 5 to 11, then I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of unfailing love with those who love him and obey his commands, listen to my prayer. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people Israel. I confess that we have sinned against you. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. We've sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, decrees, and regulations that you gave us through your servant Moses. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful to me, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey to my commands and live by them, then even if you are exiled to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place I have chosen for my name to be honored. The people you rescued by your great power and strong hand are your servants. O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put into his heart to be kind to me. We see that Nehemiah receives a burden, but he doesn't rush to action. He didn't start a building campaign. He didn't put a thermometer up outside and started getting money towards rebuilding the walls. He didn't gather a team even. He starts by praying. He starts by getting before God and praying. And what a wonderful prayer he prays. Full of worship, full of confession, full of boldness. He reminds God of the promises that God had given the nation. He confesses the sins of his people. He confesses his own sins, looking to get his heart right with God. He reminds God of his promises, of the things that he has decreed, of the things that he said he will do for his people if his people respond to him. He asks God for his favour with the king that he serves. Before Nehemiah ever picks up a stone, before he ever lays a foundation, he lays a foundation in prayer first. He gets on his knees and begins to cry out. And that's where we should start too. With letting God break our hearts with the things that break his. Maybe it's for those who don't know Jesus. Maybe it's for those that we see that are trapped by sin, that we know destroys and holds back. Maybe it might be for some of the suffering and injustice that we see. Maybe it's something different, but letting God break our hearts for the things that break his heart. And then offering ourselves as a sacrifice. We're a people filled with the Spirit of God, and we want to be led by him into the things that he's calling us into, ready to offer ourselves and respond with obedience. It's very easy to look and think, gosh, somebody should do something about that. There's all sorts of things I see that I think someone should do something about that. It's much more a sacrifice to let God break your heart and go, wow, maybe God wants me to do something. Maybe God wants me to play a part in doing something about that. That's what Nehemiah does. His heart is filled with grief, shaped by a burden, and in response he cries out, send me. Use me. I will go. I will respond to the thing that you've placed in my heart. And so if we continue our story, we move to Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It says, early in the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of the king Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never appeared before sad in his presence, And so the king said to me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified. But I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." And the king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" After I told them how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber I will need to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. So 4 months has passed from when Nehemiah first heard the news and began to weep and pray. He's been praying, he's been waiting, he's been preparing. And then one day, the king noticed his sadness. And this moment was risky. We need to understand that. What king wants a sad servant? I'm the king, I can have what I want. I want everyone who serves me to be happy. I want them to be joyful. I want them to look happy. I want them to come and serve me enthusiastically. Like, I'm king, I can do what I want. What king wants a sad servant? I could just dismiss him and be done with him and replace him with somebody else. It's a risky moment for Nehemiah. But Nehemiah steps out in faith. He spoke up. The king asks him what's wrong, and Nehemiah shares his heart. But then more than that, he asks for permission to rebuild, to go and do that. But then more than that, he asks for letters of protection. He asks for letters for timber. He asks for letters to give him everything that he needs to be able to do the job that he wants to go and do. What boldness is that? The king doesn't owe him anything. The king's the king of the whole empire. The king owes Nehemiah not a thing. Just turn around and go, "No, go away. Go and serve somewhere else. I don't want you here." What boldness. So faith isn't just about feelings. It's about movement. It moves. It takes risk. It takes hold of things. It speaks up. It plans wisely. What about us? Is there a step of faith that you've been afraid to take, maybe? Something that God's spoken to you about, that you know that he's gripped you with. Something that you know you need to do, but have been reluctant to. That you've stepped back from. Is there something that you've been afraid to do that you need to take a step of faith in? Maybe it's a conversation with someone. Maybe it's a decision you need to take about your life. Maybe it's a new direction God's talking to you about taking. It could be a number of things. Faith acts even when it's scary. It often is scary. But faith moves us to action. So we see that God grants Nehemiah favour. The king has no need to help him. No need to help him rebuild a city in a far-off land. Yet he responds favourably and gives Nehemiah everything he needs. The king allows Nehemiah to leave. He gives him letters for safe travel. He gives him a letter to get the wood from the king's forest to rebuild the city gates. And he also sends army officers and horsemen with him to protect him from bandits. Quite rightly, Nehemiah says, "And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me." Like, this is God at work in this story. Like, there's no need for the king to do any of that. Or the king just have said, "Yeah, okay, you can go." But it goes beyond that. Not just can you go, but actually here's what you need, and here's protection, and here's letters of favour for you. How amazing is this? How would Nehemiah possibly be able to go and rebuild the city walls? How would he ever have the authority and resource to do it in his own ability? Yet the hand of God is on him and he finds favour with the king. Why? Because God makes a way to do the things that he wants to have done. God makes a way. How many people here would have different testimonies of different times that God has made a way when it seemed like there was no way? If God puts a call on your heart, if God is speaking to you, if God is talking to you about doing something or directing you a certain way, and it seems impossible, and it often will, you can expect him to make a way. It might not be how you would make the way, but you can expect him to make a way, to have done the things he wants done. So many of our songs we sing songs about that, Waymaker, etc. That our God is a God who makes a way where there is no way. The Bible talks about being a people who live by faith and not by sight. I can't think how many times God's spoken to me about different stages of my life, and I just think, I can't see that. There's no way that can happen. And yet, sure enough, down the line, God's opened the door, God's made a way, God's moved a person, God's whatever it might be. And I end up where God wants me to be. The famous missionary Hudson Taylor, who planted churches in China and all sorts of other places, like 130 years ago. And this quote, God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. So Nehemiah could have heard this burden from God and think, right, I need to make a plan, I need to get the resource. He could have put his own efforts into planning it and getting everything ready. But that wasn't God's way. So you need to avoid, if God puts a burden on your heart, you've got to do it God's way. You can't do it your way. Because God gives supply for his way. That's why getting to your knees in prayer is so important. That's why not just rushing off and thinking, well, I better do something about this. No. What does God want you to do? How is God leading you? It's really important to do the things the way he wants them done. So Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. It says he arrives in Jerusalem quietly. Doesn't introduce himself to anybody. He arrives quietly and inspects the damage for himself. He doesn't rush to speak. He listens. He looks. He prays. He finds a defenceless city with no walls and no gates at the mercy of everybody. The situation is every bit as bad as he's been told. And so he takes some time to survey the destruction. And then, after that, he begins to share his heart with people. Nehemiah 2, verses 17 and 18. It says, but now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. And they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. And so they began the good work. He takes some time to survey what's going on. He sees the situation, he prays, and then he begins to share with the people. And the people respond. Faith is contagious. Living by faith is contagious. Taking steps of faith is contagious. Faith is contagious. Faithlessness is contagious. It really is. Those who choose to live by faith, people respond to that. Those who live faithlessly, do you know what? People around you begin to live faithlessly as well. These things are contagious. Faith is contagious. It doesn't just rebuild walls. It rebuilds people. It calls other people into the vision. It turns despair into determination. That's the kind of faith that rebuilds what is broken. As Nehemiah shares his faith, as he tells the people of what God has done so far, as he tells the stories of how God has moved, people respond, beginning work on restoring the wall and the gates of the city. As they begin to work, more and more people come and join in the rebuilding with them. People from different tribes, people from different jobs, different social standings, working together. People with different giftings, working next to each other, building different sections of the walls and the gates. Although Nehemiah was living with a call that God had placed on his heart, the rebuilding was about much more than just Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a vision, but it involved loads of people playing their part. God isn't looking for superstars. It's just not. Too many times in church circles, in Christian circles, it falls into, where's the big man of God? God isn't looking for superstars. It isn't about big leaders dominating. Nehemiah had the privilege of encouraging and releasing hundreds of other people to play their part in the building of the city walls. It's not about Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a burden, and so he got to share what God was doing. But actually, it's all about releasing hundreds and hundreds of others to play their part in rebuilding their bit of the wall. It's about lots of people faithfully being obedient and playing the part that God has entrusted them with. It's not about superstars. And so we find, if we jump ahead to Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15 and 16, so on October the 2nd, the wall was finished, just 52 days after we had begun. When our enemies and the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized the work had been done with the help of God. Now, I've read around this passage because the calendars are all different back then to how we have a calendar now. But the length of time from Nehemiah hearing the news from his brother about the state of the walls in Jerusalem to the time that the work was finished is about 170 days. Okay? So from when his brother comes and shares the news and Nehemiah's heart is utterly destroyed to the time that the walls have been completed is about 170 days. Something that began as an impossible dream of a servant with a broken heart who is living in exile in a foreign country is completed in 170 days. And you've got to understand how impossible this seems, okay? This is a conquered city under the control of a foreign empire with absolutely no reason to rebuild the walls. Right? There's nothing going for it at all. It is a lost cause. And actually to see a city rebuilt like that is that a threat to the empire? To see a city begin to be restored? And yet 170 days later, Jerusalem stands with walls re-established and gates in place. God's been faithful. God has provided. God has made a way. Nehemiah has been obedient. God didn't need Nehemiah's strength, but he was looking for Nehemiah's obedience. Nehemiah had nothing. He's just a servant in a foreign country. But God placed his favour upon him. Sometimes the vision and burdens we're given by God seem impossible to us. They do. You just think, there's no way. There's just no way something like that could happen. But God makes a way. God gives resource. God gives favour. He's the God of the impossible, and he will do what he says he will do. Maybe today God's placing a burden on your heart. Maybe for the first time, there's something that you just think, oh, God's gripping me with something. Maybe he's calling you to pray. Maybe he's calling you to act. Maybe he's calling you to inspire others. Or maybe he's reminding you of something that he's already said to you in times gone by. Things that have gripped you, but that you've given up on or forgotten about. Nehemiah shows us that faith doesn't ignore brokenness. It confronts it with vision. It confronts it with courage. It confronts it with prayer. Faith rebuilds what others walk away from. Let's be a people who rebuild. Not just walls, but lives. communities, families, relationships, towns, cities. Let's be a people who play our part in rebuilding things that are broken as God leads us into those things.